Boys and girls, do you remember our story about Abram and Sarai? Right, so they had been promised the land of Canaan, and when they went to Canaan, they did not have any children, even though God had said, your nation will be great. You'll have kids, and those kids will have kids, and just, well, it's going to end up being like the Jewish people. Remember I was talking about Jews? Yeah, so we know there was a lot of Jews, right? Well, they hadn't had any children yet, but when Sarah was 90 and Abraham was 100, they had a son named Isaac. Then when Isaac grew and his wife Rebecca, they had two sons, and one of them was named Jacob. Now Jacob, when he grew and had a wife, he had a lot of kids. One of them was named Joseph. Okay, so Jacob is Abraham's grandson, which means that Joseph is Abraham's great-grandson. So that is who our story is about today. Now, Jacob, that's Joseph's father, had a very large family. He had one daughter, and her name was Dinah. But guess how many sons he had? He had 12 sons. That's a lot. Poor Dinah. She's the only girl. Okay. And Joseph, he was one of the youngest sons. Then he had a little brother named Benjamin. Okay. Well, Jacob wanted all his many children to obey God and love God, but that's not going to happen. Not all of them will. Okay. They enjoyed, well, especially Joseph. Joseph enjoyed hearing stories about his father, Jacob, his grandfather, Isaac, and God's many promises to his great-grandfather, Abraham. Now, the Jews, they really honor Abraham. He is the father of the Jews, okay? And in fact, Abraham's name meant father of many nations, and Sarah's name meant princess, because she would be the mother of a great nation. All right, so Joseph believed the promises that God had made about them being part of a great nation, and Joseph learned to trust God with all of his heart. He loved him and he wanted to obey God. Joseph's 10 older brothers, though, they did not love God so much. They kind of did their own thing. They sort of obeyed their dad, Jacob, but they did not listen to the things about God or weren't interested in things about God. And that made Jacob, their father, very sad. That would make your parents sad too. If you didn't love God and you weren't interested in things about God or want to obey him, that would make them sad too. Well, one of Joseph's jobs was to help his 10 older brothers take care of their father's sheep. And Joseph was a good helper. That's the good thing about Joseph. He loved to help. He was always willing to do what his father and mother asked. He worked hard. As Joseph worked with his brothers, he sometimes saw things that they should not do. Now, Joseph never should have tattled on them. Remember, we don't want to tattle and tell on them to get them in trouble. Maybe he wasn't trying to get them in trouble. Maybe he was just telling his father, Jacob, what they were doing. And that made Jacob even more sad. So Joseph went to his father and told him the things his brothers did, and Jacob was disappointed with them. Joseph's brothers began to dislike Joseph. They didn't like that he was so good and always doing the right thing. It was just easy for Joseph, but it wasn't easy for them to do. And they didn't like it that Joseph would go and tell on the things that they were doing. So they would make fun of him, actually, for wanting to please God. We should never make fun of anybody, especially if they love God and want to do what God wants them to do. And they laughed at him, but Joseph knew it's always better to please God. While it hurts our feelings that other people laugh at us, what matters most is what God thinks of us, if he is pleased with us. One day, Jacob gave Joseph a very special gift. It was a beautiful coat. Now, it would cost a lot of money to make the fabric and then sew it together. Also, the fabric would have been dyed. Dyed means that you turn it into a certain color, because a lot of times, like if you used sheep's wool to make fabric, it was the color of sheep's wool, which is like white or sometimes black. So they would dye it different colors and then sew it together, and it was very, very special to receive such a gift. Well, do you think this made Joseph's brothers happy or sad or mad? They were not very happy. They were mad. They were jealous because Joseph got this special coat. Now, I know sometimes when your brother or sister gets something and you don't, you might get jealous. Or if we were in the classroom and you saw one student get a special prize or special gift and you didn't, you might become jealous. I hope not. It's not good to be jealous. We should be happy for other people when good things happen to them. Always be doing that. Always be happy. Don't get mad. Don't get jealous, because you'll be like Joseph's brothers, and we'll see how angry they became. Okay? They even called Joseph's names, and they said, "Your father's favorite. He loves you the most." Well, one day they said, "Just you wait. We're going to fix you." That means we're going to get even. We'll get back at you for you being father's favorite. Was it right for the brothers to call Joseph names? No. Okay, it's never right to do that. Was it right for them to be jealous of what Joseph had? No. That's something sometimes we really need to work on, is not being angry and we need to want to please our parents and wanting to please our Heavenly Father. We should be happy for others when they get something, because remember, when God gives people gifts, we should be happy, because if we're not happy, then we're saying we're disappointed in God, and we shouldn't be disappointed in God. Well, one day, Jacob sent Joseph out into the fields to check on his brothers as they were caring for those sheep. Well, Jacob, he still loved the other boys. They were getting grown up now, but he still loved them, even though they didn't please God. They were his kids, and he wanted to make sure everything was okay. So he sent Joseph to check on them. When the brothers spotted Joseph coming to check on them, they decided that that was the time they were going to get even. They were going to get rid of Joseph once and for all. So they grabbed him, put him in a pit, and sold him to slave traders that were coming through. Now, slave traders, that means that they would actually buy people, like you buy something at the store, that you would buy people and you would sell them to others to be their slaves, not a servant. A servant is paid well. A servant wants to be hired. They want to work for someone, but a slave does not. A slave doesn't have any choice. So Joseph would be taken to another country and sold in a land called Egypt. If you think of the land where they have those pyramids, those triangle-shaped buildings, that was the land. Now, he didn't speak Egyptian. Okay, he didn't understand their ways. He didn't understand the food that they ate. It was different than what he was used to. Okay, and also he was a slave. He would have to work in the house of an important Egyptian. While he was working there, he was actually accused of something he did not do. Do you like to be accused of something you didn't do? It doesn't seem fair, does it? But even when he was accused of that, he still obeyed God. And he actually was thrown in prison for this thing that somebody was accusing him of. But even in prison, Joseph did his best. If he was given a job to do, he did it well. He still trusted and obeyed God. Soon, the keeper of the prison, he noticed Joseph, and he chose him to be a special helper. So even though he was in prison, he was being treated as best as a prisoner could be, because the keeper of the prison saw there was something different about Joseph. Remember, that's because he loves God. Okay? Now, in prison, Joseph met two servants of Pharaoh. And remember, Pharaoh is like the Egyptian king. So they would call him a Pharaoh. And each of these servants had dreams from God. And Joseph, because he had a close relationship, that means he was close to God, close friendship with God, he was able to tell the servants of Pharaoh what their dreams meant. That's pretty special. So one of those servants was the butler of Pharaoh, and he promised Joseph that when he got out of prison, he would remember Joseph. Well, that didn't necessarily happen, at least not right away. Well, much time passed, and then those servants had been released and sent back to work for Pharaoh. And then one night, Pharaoh had a dream from God, and the butler that was working for Pharaoh, he knew that there was somebody who could help him interpret what the dream meant, because no matter who the Pharaoh asked, nobody knew what the dream meant. So the butler went to Pharaoh and said, "Hey, I remember a man in prison, and he told me what my dream meant. Maybe he can tell you what your dreams mean." And so Even though, now remember, Joseph, he had not done anything wrong, even though he was in prison, and that's what the butler told the Pharaoh. The butler brought Joseph to Pharaoh. And God wanted Pharaoh to know that soon there would be a famine in the land. A famine is where there is just not enough food to eat. Because there's no rain, the crops can't grow, the animals don't have anything to drink. So the crops die, the animals die, and there's no food. So soon there would be a famine in the land, and everybody, a lot of people, would be hungry. Pharaoh could tell that Joseph was a man who could be trusted. Okay? Pharaoh asked his helpers, do you think we could find a better man than Joseph to do a job where he can prepare for this famine? And Pharaoh knew that God was with Joseph. There was something very special about him. So the Pharaoh made him an important ruler in the land. In fact, he would be second to Pharaoh. He would be kind of like a co-king or vice king. Like we have a president and then a vice president. They would have Pharaoh, and then they would have like a vice Pharaoh, which would be Joseph. And so Pharaoh gave Joseph the big job of preparing for the famine. So the famine would happen in 7 years, and so Joseph had all that time to store grain and all kinds of other things in these big buildings that he had created, and they would be ready for the famine. So you can see that Joseph was very smart, and he was a problem solver. He knew what they would need to do in order to have enough food for the famine. He became one of the most important leaders in all of Egypt. He loved God. That's the kind of person that we want to have in charge of our country, is somebody who loves God, who does what's right, and who is smart and can figure things out. All right, so then on our next story, you will find out what happens to Joseph. Remember, his brothers are still back in the land of Canaan, and his father still does not know that Joseph is alive. Because one thing I didn't tell you is that Joseph's brothers did something to make their father Jacob think that Joseph was dead. Ah, poor Jacob. Poor Joseph, not being able to see his father, or even though his brothers were so mean, even seeing his brothers. So we'll find out tomorrow what happened to Joseph.